Hello everyone, Andy Progapandist is here, and I'm going to explain you today how to use date pickers in your Rails 5.1 app with the Webpacker enabled. So you remember that previously when we wanted to install some sort of a plugin, then we had to dig into our app assets, JavaScript, application.js, and then basically require something here. Also, we need to install a gem that wraps around some JavaScript library. And then we also need to go to app assets, style sheets, application.css, and import style sheets for the plugin here. Well, the process is kind of straightforward, but still a lot of people find it confusing, and I'd say it's a cognitive drain because you need to remember to insert all those bits into different places, and if you fail to do something, your application will break in so many different ways. For example, if you just forget a semicolon here, it will break the whole CSS, and so on and so on. Also, one thing to know that the date picker that we used previously, which is called Bootstrap Date Picker, the installation instructions for Bootstrap Date Picker are not really Rails friendly. So in order to find the way to install it properly with Asset Pipeline, we needed to do a Google search, something like this, then look for a Ruby wrapper, for a gem that wraps around the library, then follow these instructions. And also here you see that these instructions talk about CSS, so you also needed to convert synthesis in your head. Well, no longer, because now we are using Rails 5.1. Let's just check that we have Rails 5.1. See, that's here. And Rails 5.1 gives us a great instrument that is called Yarn. Yarn is basically a bundler for JavaScript dependencies. So probably you've heard about NPM, which is a node package manager, and that has hundreds of thousands of libraries that you can install right away. Well, Yarn is an attempt to make NPM more user-friendly. So it's still the same catalog, but you can use it in a much more straightforward way. So the date picker that we recommend you to use with your Rails Webpack application is called Flatpickr. So you just go and look for Flatpickr. It has a very nice documentation, and basically installing it is a piece of cake. So you just, while being inside your project in a command line, you just type yarn add Flatpickr. So this will download a package and put it into the node modules folder inside of your Rails app. So let's wait for this process to complete. Okay, there we go. It's done. So now if we peek inside the node modules, we can see that we have all this scores of dependencies here. And when we scroll to the letter F, we are going to find our Flatpickr. So we can look inside. It has all these files, and it's really useful to look inside the node modules and see what was installed. It may serve us. So how do we hook it up? How do we make it usable in our application? For now, our application is a really simple one. All it does, it displays this sort of form. It's a simple form, and it's not tied to any particular model. So in my home HTML RB, I just used simple form that sends a get with input values starts at and ends at. And you see, I'm not using a model here. I'm just using a symbol that will be used as a key in our params. And this is a really nice way to do search forms, that just need to collect params from the user, and they don't need to put it in some active record model. So here, if I type something, I don't know, 2011, 12, 15, or 2011, 12, 17, and then I press go, then you will see that this form is going to be submitted as a get, so it's all in our URL. Okay, so now we want a Flatpickr here. So the first thing that we need to do is to understand how Webpack bundles our JavaScript. So this folder, app assets JavaScript, we no longer need it to handle our dependencies. So we have a new one, which is called app/JavaScript. And inside of this folder, we have a folder named packs. And then inside of the folder, we have an application.js. So note that this application.js, so this one from app assets JavaScript, is an application.js that uses Sprocket, the standard Rails way to manage JavaScript in asset pipeline. And this application.js is an entry point for a Webpacker gem. So it accepts new ES6 import statements. So we can just say import Flatpickr from import Flatpickr from Flatpickr. And some people use semicolons. I choose not to use semicolons because it's not really required in modern JavaScript. So let's just skip semicolons for now. So importing Flatpickr from the node package basically gives us an access to the Flatpickr variable, and we can see the usage example here. So this is our most basic usage example. So under the getting started here, we can also note that they use this way, which is a node way to, or sometimes it's called common JS way to handle dependencies with the require function. And we are using the import. This is a newer way. This is an ES6 modules. So you can look it up online if you're interested, but this is the recommended syntax. So, and the way we use the plugin is quite straightforward. So there is some sort of Flatpickr function that is probably a constructor, so it will create an object. And we can use it either with an ID or with a class. So let's try using it with a class. So how are we going to name our class? Well, it's logical to name our class Datepicker, for example, because then in all the fields in our app that need a Datepicker, we can just put class Datepicker. And this is an object with settings that we can pass. And for now, let's just leave it empty and let's see what's the most default form of our Flatpickr is going to be. So another thing to know is that even though you have JavaScript packs application.js entry point, it is not used inside your Rails application until you explicitly tell Rails to do so. And the way to tell it is go to our application layout, application.html.erb, and see here that we have style sheet link tag that includes all the CSS part of asset pipeline in our layout. We have JavaScript include tag that does the same for the JavaScript part of asset pipeline. But even though we still have asset pipeline for something in our application, but our plugins now go through Webpacker. So we need another statement here. And the name of this is JavaScript pack tag application. So notice the difference. Include tag. It's the old way. It's for application JS located in your assets JavaScript. And pack tag is a new way. It's for application JS located in your JavaScript packs. And also the same for style sheets. So style sheet pack tag application. Okay? You may ask, why do we need a style sheet pack tag if we are only handling JavaScript? Well, Webpacker, or to be more exact, Webpack, the bundler that is used by Webpacker gem, can build all JavaScript dependencies for us, can bundle them, serve them, and it can also do the same with CSS. And Datepicker is a plugin that obviously has some styling, so we need to include that styling too. And the beauty of this is that we can include CSS right inside our JavaScript modules. So let's see how we're going to do that. So this is something that is not straightforward at all in the documentation, because documentation is not, it's not written for Rails. So, but that's a trick that will work with other plugins too. So we just find the Flatpickr source in our node modules folder. So there it is. We found it. And you see here, let's examine what's inside. So we have the we have CSS files right here. So for example, this flatpickr.css. Well, it looks like the CSS for our plugin. There is a minified version of this CSS right here. And minified version is better because there is no white space, so it saves all those precious, bits and bytes that we are sending over the HTTP. So what we need to do now is we need to import, and we are going to import Flatpickr, and here we put the path inside our node modules. We don't need to put node modules here. Webpacker is smart enough. So we go flatpickr/dist/flatpickr.min.css. So you see now we are importing our plugin CSS from inside of the JavaScript. Okay, so this part is done. And now we need to go to our form. And inside our form, we just need to, say that put, a Datepicker class on our inputs. So with simple form, it's input HTML that takes a method hash and the class called Datepicker. And then the same for another field, right? So there it is, done. Also, you know that this example doesn't use active record, doesn't use a modal. And perhaps you remember that if you have an active record model that has a field of type date or date time, then a simple form will try to be smart with us and will try to represent the date as a series of select boxes. And this is not what we need. So with your active record, you will have to do this. So as string, okay, just to be sure. Well, then let's restart our server because we did so many things. We did all that installations. So now after we restarted our server, after our style sheet pack, JavaScript pack tag is included in our application layout, and after we configured our plugin in application.js, let's refresh the page and see what happens. You see here, Webpacker is compiling our assets, and you can see it right in the Rails output. Okay, so this is what happened. Now you can see it's a nice Datepicker. Okay, so you can select a date here and select a date there, and then when you send it, it's being put into the URL. Or if you're sending a post, you know these values will be in your params, in the body of the request. Okay. Also, this is just a peculiarity of how Flatpickr works with Bootstrap. He adds class. He basically makes inputs ineditable, so you cannot type anything here. You know, perhaps it's a good thing. So basically, it's a very straightforward UX. The user can just pick a date from the Datepicker. He cannot modify it there. So he cannot, you know, put some numbers that will mess up your backend. So that's a good thing. Okay, so, but you see that here the format is the backend format to keep the date, right? It's a PostgreSQL date format. It's format that is understood by Active Record. So what we need here is to make it look more human. So there is an option that we can pass to our options object, and it's called alt_input.true. So let's see what that does. Let's refresh our page. So with the alt_input_true, so the Webpacker is recompiling our assets now. Okay, so with alt_input_true, you're going to select values, and they're going to be put in human readable format. But there is a trick right there. So when you send it, you will still get the database friendly format of the date. So that's neat. Okay, so some other options that we can pass. For example, just refer to the documentation. Here there are different examples of usage. So for example, there is a way to turn your date picker in a date time picker. So you just put another key in our object with enable time true. We reload the page again. Still takes some time to compile, but that's actually because, you know, QuickTime is also recording my screen and my RAM is probably at the limit of its capacity. Usually it goes much faster. And now if you pick a date, you're also being required to put in some time, okay? So now we pick the date and the time. And if you hit go, this is going to be the format that is sent to your backend, okay? Well, another good thing about this plugin that inside of our node modules, inside of the source, we have the themes pack. And here, if you change your CSS that you import from the default to dist/themes/ I don't know, I like Airbnb.css. And if we reload the page, you're going to see that it looks almost like an Airbnb. So that's handy for your Airbnb weeks, right? So it also works with time. Okay. Another trick, oh, that there is an experimental part of this plugin. So you need to import this function explicitly. It's called range plugin. And basically, when you put that key in our options, you are able to select a range of dates. So, for example, for the reservation on your Airbnb clone. So the only thing here, though, is it doesn't work with clauses. So in your form, you need to identify your inputs by IDs, and IDs should be different. So we can call it start date, and we can call it end date. And then in our application.js, we are going to select the start date, and then range until end date. Okay. So let's see if it works. Let's test. Webpacker is compiling our assets. And there we are. So we pick the first date, and then you see right there, we can pick the second date, and it's done. Okay, and now one last thing. So basically, in order to make our code more presentable and maintainable, we don't want to keep all this plugin specific imports and initializers in our application.js. Our application.js should be the entry point that just contains import statements for some other files. So what we can do, if we can create a new folder inside our JavaScript. So we can call it plugins, for instance, and then inside that folder, we're going to create a file, and we're going to name it as our plugin. So it's going to be flatpickr.js. So we have our flatpickr.js. I'm sorry, it shouldn't be a folder, it's a file. So we create a new file here, call it flatpickr.js. And now let's just cut and paste everything to that file. So now all our Flatpickr specific code, initialization code, is inside the plugins Flatpickr. So what do we need to do here in application.js? Well, we just need to import that file. So we're just going to import plugins Flatpickr. So now our application.js, because you may have other plugins here, and it's going to get messy really, really soon. So we really want to keep it just to one-liners, to one-liner import statements. Okay, so let's check if it still works. Compiling. And yes, it works exactly the same. So that was a quick screencast on how to use JavaScript plugins and Datepicker, Flatpickr particularly, with the Rails 5.1 application that uses Webpacker and Yarn. Thank you for watching, and good luck with the project, guys. Bye.